Hi, I'm Jessica Apilar, and I, along with Francisco Hernandez and Joss Murillo, will be presenting you the struggles of being multiracial. So let's start off by talking about a few terms that have been historically used to denote someone of mixed race. So in the Hawaiian language, we have hapa. In the Spanish language, we have mestizo, Creole, mulatto. British English use half caste. The Japanese use hafu. The South Africans use bushies. Us Americans use mutt. Um, the Thai language uses lukrong, and Brazilian Portuguese has many different terms from cor de canela to cor de rosa to cor de crema. And if you look at the bottom, we have many individuals, prominent figures that are mixed race, from Alicia Keys, Vanessa Hudgens, Jason Momoa, Mariah Carey, and Bruno Mars. Now let me give you some background history. From the 1700s to the 2000s, people were only allowed to identify as one race in the census. But in the early 2000s, specifically 2010, individuals were finally allowed to identify as biracial or multiracial. In 1967, 3% of newlywed couples were interracial, but now 17% of newly weds are interracial, and 10% of all married couples are interracial. Back in 1959, majority of white Americans opposed interracial marriage, but in 2017, 91% of Americans had a positive or at least neutral view of interracial marriage. Now here's a chart showing the historical public opinion of approval and disapproval of interracial marriage in the US from 1958 to 2007. And you can see that the approval rate drastically increases over time, with the disapproval rate drastically decreasing, with those with no opinion staying relatively within the same range. Society and individuals themselves tend to use visual aids and appearance as the way to identify a person, regardless of their true race. Even after correction, individuals choose to believe their perception on how a person should be identified as one race, rather than all of them if they are biracial or even multiracial. Now here is a poem spoken by Maya Angelou that has been adapted by We Wear the Mask by Paul Laurence Dunbar.
We wear the mask that grins and lies. It shades our cheeks and hides our eyes. This debt we pay to human guile. With torn and bleeding hearts, we smile and mouth with myriad subtleties. Why should the world be overwise in counting all our tears and sighs? Nay, let them only see us while we wear the mask. We smile, but oh my God, our tears to thee from tortured souls arise. And we sing, hey, baby, we sing, hey, but oh, the clay is vile beneath our feet, and long the mile. But let the world think otherwise. We wear the mask.
Now, this poem was originally written by Paul Laurence Dunbar to describe the hidden feelings of how African Americans suffered internally and how they navigate through white society. But if put in the context of mixed race individuals, this can relate to the feelings of how multiracial individuals hide the internal pain and struggles that they suffer, that are hidden away, and how they themselves navigate in a society that lacks the understanding of those that come from multi-ethnic backgrounds. Now, specifically what some individuals face, we will talk about it through some interviews that we've conducted. The first being Nia Sanchez, a Mexican, Filipina, and Chinese individual. We asked her, do you identify more as one than the other? And she stated, throughout my life, it changed based on who I was around. Being biracial is really hard because if I was Mexican, I'm too Asian. If I'm Asian, they say, you don't look like us or look Asian. And it's hard to find that commonality. We also asked her, have you been treated differently because of your multiracial background? Have you experienced any discrimination? She stated this. In high school, many of my classmates were Korean, Chinese, Japanese, Vietnamese. It was very cliquey and anyone outside of the race were turned away. and the Caucasians were very cliquey as well. We also interviewed John Murillo, who is of Cherokee, Black, and Latino descent. We asked him, "What do you identify as?" He stated this: Black and indigenous, ethnically Latino. Sometimes I say Afro-Latino to simplify things. I don't typically pick which part of my identity I identify with more, since each part and each identification is inflected by the other. So even if I were to say I identify more with my Blackness, I'd be doing so from this particularly mixed position that would color my answer anyway. I do center my Blackness, though. I had once struggled to balance all of this, and sometimes I still do, but much less because of particular family histories and because of how I'm typically identified from without. Usually I'm identified immediately as Black because of my hair and skin tone. And typically it's clear that I'm mixed, but unclear with what. So most people seem to identify me as Black from the jump, and I'm sure that plays a role here. We also interviewed Michael Franklin Lewis, who is of Cherokee, African American, and Panamanian descent. We asked him, "Have you ever experienced any advantages to being mixed?" He said, "I can understand the plights of both African Americans and Latinos. This allows me to excel in my job by relating to the youth in inner city communities and uplifting them. I can't pretend that I understand every Latino, but I have a good starting place. I'm thankful that I'm able to see the perspective of two ways of living." And we asked him, "What do you identify as?" He said, "Most people see me as African American, so I do not correct them." And then we asked him, "Do you identify more as one than the other?" He said this: "It is hard to pin my answer down, but I would say my African American side and Panamanian sides are represented equally through different avenues. I have a deep love for my African American brothers and the communities we find ourselves in. I care deeply for the empowerment and community of the African American people. I grew up in Panama and moved to LA when I was 15. Up until that point, I was only Panamanian, so it was hard for me to shed that identity. Even those that come from mixed backgrounds are still subject to the issue of colorism, as we asked John Murillo, and he said this. He said that he escapes certain forms of discrimination, profiling, anti-Black violence because he's not as dark, because his hair is different or looser in texture, although that's not all the case all the time. But he does face anti-Blackness, as all Black folk do, albeit inflicted by the lightness of his skin. He even stated that he is not trusted by Black people because he's not all Black, and that he's not accepted by Latino and indigenous folk, who are mostly white or white passing or non-Black. He said that these aren't structural or systemic forms of violence that are comparable to larger and more gratuitous experiences and histories of anti-Blackness. So they are not that serious, but they do present themselves as problems and are often murky, hurtful experiences to navigate. All too often, there are cases where individuals who are either biracial or multiracial suffer from some sort of cultural identity crisis. This can be for many reasons, but research has shown, and even throughout interviews, that two of the most common are how society has this wrong perception of how a person of more than one race should be allowed to identify, as well as struggles intertwining with one's on family because of culture clashes. Being multiracial is very hard at times because not only do you have to identify towards society, but you have to find a safe way to identify within your own culture. Now here are some racial individuals abroad. Ariana Miyamoto, Miss Universe Japan 2015, is of African American descent and Japanese descent, and she is the first Japanese woman to represent Japan that is mixed race, to represent Japan in Miss Universe. And she stated this: "If I say I'm Japanese, the reply would be, no, you can't be. People would not believe that, but if I say I'm Hafu, people agree. There is no word like Hafu outside Japan, but I think we need it here. In order for us mixed kids to live in Japan, it is indispensable and I value it." Ricky Whittle, an actor from the UK, is of Jamaican and British descent, and he had struggles growing up. He said this: "Growing up at the time, I didn't want to be Black because I was bullied, and I'd tell my mom that I wanted to be white like everyone else at school." Even a Filipina Canadian, Shay Mitchell, who is also an actor, um, struggled with balancing out her mixed heritage. She said this: I was trying so hard to be everything that I wasn't. I wish I could have just told my younger self to enhance what you have. Now, we also asked our interviewees what advice we would give, advice they would give to other mixed people. They said, Michael Franklin Lewis said, "My advice would be to love every part of yourself, and you don't have to hide every part of yourself for anybody." John Murillo said, "The uniqueness is important, but we must also be very real about the privileges we possess as mixed people." And Nia Sanchez said, "It sometimes might be hard to find your niche, but look at being biracial as an advantage, because you can find more than one niche because of your background. Don't take it too hard if people have a hard time understanding you and where you come from and who you are as a person. Unfortunately, in society, media plays a big role in how biracial people are depicted. So when people don't understand, just give it some time and look at as an opportunity to teach them about your culture and hopefully enlighten them that stereotypes aren't always applicable." Now, often we ponder, which do I identify as today? This needs to stop. It needs to be okay to identify as anything we are, as that is what makes us unique. We need to continue to raise awareness of the major crisis that biracial and multiracial individuals suffer. In order to stop the inequality between those of more than one race and one race, we must shift the mindset of society to welcome biracial and multiracial people. Songs like Pentatonix's Imagine is an incredible and great reminder of this. Now, here is our message to you. As we mentioned before, we need to recalibrate our mindsets and make it to be ones that are more welcoming, considerate, and open-minded to individuals that are multiracial. We live in a modern world and a modern society. Times are changing and we must adapt along with it. We must learn from the experiences and struggles of those that we misunderstand or have a lack of understanding of, and improve ourselves, our actions, and our mindsets. We hope that from this that you can have a better understanding of what it means to be multiracial and the struggles that come with it. Thank you.